Okay, today while I'm gone, we are going to cover the first part of chapter 4, which starts on page 90, and section 1 goes through page 94. So I'm going to cover some of the basics from the lesson, and then you will work on the 4.1 work together and on your own. And then the assignment for Tuesday is going to be the 4-1 application problem. So in this chapter, we start working with a chart of accounts. So you've already used accounts like cash and supplies and accounts payable and accounts receivable, and you will continue to see those, but now you're going to organize them into this chart of accounts, and you're going to see that we're eventually going to take some of the information from the general journal, and we're going to use that column in the general journal that says post ref. We're going to use that now to take information out of the general journal and put it into our chart of accounts. So my example is, if you could imagine, if you wanted to know what your balance was in the supplies account, it would be pretty difficult to figure out the balance of the supplies account if you didn't have your chart of accounts. So you'd have to look through every general journal page and add and subtract everything that happened to supplies, which really doesn't make a lot of business sense. So the chart of accounts lets you see how much money and keep track of what you have in each of the accounts. Okay, so how does the T account relate to the account form? So this image that you're seeing is also on page 91 in your textbook. This is what the account will look like. So where it says account here, this might say cash, or there will be another one that says supplies, and another one that says accounts receivable, Ashley Witt. Okay, so the date is important. So what date did the transaction happen? And the post-ref column is where you're going to say, did this come from the general journal and the page number? Or, for example, Kayla and Michael are working with other journal pages. So they might be working with the sales, page 1, or cash payments, page 3. So the post reference tells you what journal it came from and the page number. This debit and credit column here, this is where you're saying if the transaction that you are entering was a debit or credit. And then here, this is the total balance. So for example, if you were working with cash, you would see that cash always has a debit balance. So that the number would be here for the total that's in the cash account. If you were working with, let's say this was accounts payable, accounts payable always has a credit balance. So the balance would be over here, but the transaction itself could be debit or credit. Okay, that's the most important thing that I want you to understand. So why do we use this chart of accounts? This is really so that we can, like it says here, so that we can trace back to where that information came from. It would not be uncommon for you to accidentally type one number here in the debit column and have a different number in your general journal page. So this is again one of those double checks to make sure that all of our information is correct. And this is on page 92. This is an example of what Techno Consulting's chart of accounts looks like. So one of the things that some of the things that you're going to need to know. This they call the balance sheet account. So anything that is an asset, a liability, or anything in owner's equity, those are all in the balance sheet. The income statement accounts are what we would call revenue and expenses. And in chapter 5, we start working a little bit more with income statements and balance sheets, and possibly even later in chapter 4. So when they have a number system, so assets are always classified as 100s, liabilities are always classified as 200, owner's equity is 300, revenue are 400, expenses are 500, and they typically go by tens. So when you first create your chart of accounts, you will create it with cash as 110, petty cash as 120, unless you have something else in there that would be, in a different place. And so they kind of explain a little bit of terminology on page 92. So the group of accounts is called a ledger. So we would call this group of accounts, this is our ledger. And the ledger that contains all of the accounts needed to prepare financial statements. So a balance sheet and an income statement are considered a financial statement. And then again, the number that we assigned here is called the account number, and that needs to be on each of those. If you look back here, account number is something that's important, and that has to be on here as well. So account numbers. So how do we assign these account numbers? So account, if it's in the 100s, the 1 means which division did it come out of. So if you see something that starts with a 2, you know it's a liability. If you see something that starts with a 5, you know that it is an expense. And then the second 2 numbers, or the second digits, so 10, that's where it's located within the general ledger. Now, something that will probably happen is you will probably add accounts throughout your lifetime. If you started your business and these were the accounts that you had, that doesn't mean that you might not get another accounts receivable account, or accounts payable for that matter. So they show you on page 93 how to add an account. So if you see there, it says I want to go back here. So there is a section on page 93 in the left column that talks about adding an account. So let's say that you have advertising expense already set. Let's say you have advertising expense set here, and you already have insurance expense set at 520. Well, these are really supposed to be in alphabetical order. So we would need to add, let's say we want to add gasoline expense. Maybe that's a new account that we want to use. So in order to do that, you would add an account in between here, and you would use the halfway point between 10 and 20, which is 15. And you would create a new account. So then you would have something that said 510, 515, and then 520. Or another example would be if you needed to add water expense, then you would create it down below, because alphabetically it comes after 560.
Michael Harris, please come to the office. Michael Harris.
So if you needed to add water expense, you would add it as 570 and then water expense here. And in the work together on your own and in the assignment, you will be adding a new account more than once. So if you need to reference back, look at page 92 or 93. 93 will be where you see adding the accounts. And then really the last part is when you have to open a general ledger account. So remember, this is a full picture of what the general ledger account looks like. You saw a blank snapshot of one on page 91, but this is what it looks like filled out. So we start with titling the account as cash, and then always make sure that you include the account number as well. And then once you start putting transactions in here, you will have a date, you will have a post reference, you will have either a debit or credit transaction, and then in cash, for example, you would update the balance here because it is a debit balance account. Item you do not use. You do not use this column. You will not have to type in a description of what happened. So again, you're using date, post reference, transaction, debit or credit, and then balance. So you're updating 1, 2, 3, 4 items on each line when you put a transaction into the general ledger account. And like I said, so when you get to the work together, you're going to prepare a chart of accounts, which, like I said before, you will organize the accounts, and they give you the names of the accounts, but then you need to start assigning them. So if you're not sure how to do that, look back at page 92 in your book. Look at that chart of accounts that was already created. And it says arrange the expense accounts in alphabetical order. Now, the order that you use for the assets, you need to follow what they've done in the chart of accounts on page 92. Okay. That is primarily what we are concerned with for this section. Again, so use that chart of accounts on page 92, and then your assignment for Tuesday is to complete the 4-1 application. And Mrs. Onen has copies of the answer key, so if you have questions, but she will not be able to look in Applia and tell you how you did. So good luck, and make sure that you use your books for reference.